Migration, there we go again. Well, migration is a hot topic, right? What was just said there is not true. Migration is one of those hot topics that keeps on coming back in politics, and particularly in the last few years, wherever you look in the West, in the Netherlands or neighboring countries, across the ocean, in the United States. It's one of the most hotly debated topics. But interestingly enough, you'd think if a topic is hotly debated, you'd think a lot of information is available about it. The paradox is actually the more we seem to discuss migration, the less our discussion seems to be based on any knowledge of migration. And it really struck me a lot because I've been doing research for the last 30 years about migration. We don't seem to be basing the debate on any evidence whatsoever. So what is going on? What is going on is that we've become so polarized about this issue that any nuance is getting out of the window. The problem is not knowledge, because there is a lot of knowledge, and I will share that knowledge with you, about migration. We talk about a century of migration research, migration scholarship, but it doesn't reach the public debate. It doesn't reach what you read in the headlines. It is not reflected in what politicians tell us about migration, from the left to the right. So what's going wrong? It's the framing of the debate, in pro and anti terms. Imagine a journalist ask an economist, "Mr. Economist, are you in favor or against the economy?" It's completely stupid. That question has been asked to me many times. "Oh, you're in favor of migration." I say, how can you discuss a serious topic like migration in such terms? To be generally against or in favor of migration is like indeed being against or in favor of markets or agriculture or music indeed. It is stupid. Being against or in favor of migration would be like thinking away a fundamental element of who we are as human beings and as societies. It would be like thinking or wishing away a fundamental element of who we are as human beings, as societies, as I said, and this is exactly what politicians seem to be doing. The problem with that polarization is that any nuance goes out of the window, in which pro and anti-migration camps usually exaggerate the harms and benefits of migration. It is a totally wrong way of thinking about migration. The real questions are, why have politicians failed to develop policies that make migration work better for all of us? Why have 3 decades, 30 years, over 30 years of border controls failed to bring migration under control? Why is the suffering at our borders not stopping? Why do we continue to see problems with immigration? Why are politicians failing to deliver on their promises? These are the real questions, which you will barely see any journalist asking those questions to politicians. It's all about how migration should be, ought to be, not how it is. And this simplistic framing has been paralyzing migration debates for decades now, and is a major obstacle for gaining a better understanding of migration. And the central claim of my book is that policies have failed to deliver or have completely backfired because they were not based on a real understanding of the nature, the causes and consequences of migration, because the truth gets distorted at all sides. And in the beginning of my career, I was still optimistic. I think, okay, I do research, I communicate my findings to politicians, and they will read my amazing findings, and they will have this aha moment, this light bulb moment, and they will change everything they do and say about politics. But that's not how it works. Once I gave a talk to high-ranking civil servants and politicians at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the Netherlands, and after the talk, one high-ranking civil servant came to me and said, "Your talk is really good, and we actually agree with you, but implementing it will be political suicide for our minister." And such reactions, it's not the only one, convinced me that there is no point just talking truth to power, because power already knows the truth. And particularly with a topic like migration, politicians are busy distorting the truth. The problem is not a lack of knowledge. And this is why I decided to write my book, because I think the public deserves to know the real story about migration, which is a more nuanced story than you'd read in a newspaper, but which also goes beyond the simple pro and anti-framing. We need an entirely new way of thinking about migration, not as a problem to be solved, or a solution to problem, as the pro-migration coalition would argue, but as it is. We need a scientific vision on migration, based on facts rather than fears, based on evidence rather than ideology. And what I try to do in my book is to question 22 popular myths on migration, which you can find both on the left and on the right, that are peddled by politicians, experts, pundits, humanitarian organizations, and so forth about migration.